A judge insulted Jasmine Crockett in open court. Minutes later, he was in handcuffs. You won't believe what happened next. Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to high-pressure situations. She had spent years in legal battles, first as a criminal defense attorney, fighting for those who couldn't afford representation, and later as a congresswoman, where her voice became a powerful weapon against injustice. But this day felt different. As she stepped into the courtroom of Judge Howard Gates, a man notorious for his sharp tongue and unpredictable rulings, she knew this wouldn't be an ordinary hearing. At stake was a high-profile local government corruption case, tangled and explosive, with the potential to shatter not just careers, but trust in the system itself. The defendant was a wealthy developer with deep ties to Republican circles, accused of siphoning state funds into personal projects. The evidence was substantial, and Crockett, now acting as a special prosecutor in this case, thanks to her legal background and reputation as a justice advocate, had come prepared. What she hadn't anticipated was the level of hostility radiating from the bench before she'd even uttered a word. Judge Gates barely glanced at her as she approached the prosecution table. Instead, he flipped through a file with deliberate slowness, letting the courtroom stew in silence. Not just procedural silence, but the kind that carried weight. Finally, without looking up, he spoke. "Miss Crockett, I trust you've brought something worthwhile. Or shall we skip to the part where you waste my time with your theatrics?" A few chuckles drifted from the back of the room, mostly from the developer's legal team. Crockett ignored them. She'd faced worse. "Your Honor," she replied, "the evidence speaks for itself. This case involves the misuse of taxpayer money, and my job is to present the facts clearly and accurately." Judge Gates leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. "Taxpayer money, huh? That's never been the basis for baseless accusations, right?" Crockett's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone steady. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I wouldn't call charges of corruption and fraud baseless." For a brief moment, their eyes met, his cold and calculating, hers resolute. But before she could continue, he cut her off again. "Miss Crockett, spare me the lectures. Get to the point. I don't have time to indulge your progressive fantasies." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The courtroom wasn't packed, but those present tensed, sensing something off. Judges could be tough, but this was personal. Jasmine took a deep breath, recalibrating. She knew what was happening. Gates wanted to throw her off balance, control the pace, put her on the defensive. But she wasn't about to let him. She picked up a folder from the table and opened it. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A. These financial records clearly show." "Do you always bury people in paperwork, Miss Crockett?" Gates interrupted. "Or is this just your way of compensating for a lack of real arguments?" That one hit. The room shifted instantly. The defense attorney smirked. A few reporters exchanged glances. But Crockett didn't flinch. Back in her days defending clients in Texas courtrooms, she'd learned that men like Gates thrived on intimidation. The only way to beat them was to never let them see you rattled. She paused, just long enough to make a point without words, then set the folder down and clasped her hands. "Your Honor," she said, "if you'd prefer to keep this personal, I'm happy to request a recess to address any professional concerns you might have." It was subtle, not aggressive, not disrespectful, but sharp. A clear warning that she wouldn't back down. The judge's lips curled slightly. Was it amusement? Annoyance? Hard to tell, but he wasn't done. "Oh, I don't have concerns, Miss Crockett. I just see a weak case when it's in front of me." This time, the reaction wasn't just murmurs. There were gasps, a whispered comment. This wasn't how a judge was supposed to run a hearing. Jasmine could feel the room's focus shifting between her and Gates, like a tennis match. But she wasn't about to get into a shouting match. That's what he wanted. Instead, she adjusted her blazer, straightened her papers, and looked him square in the eye. "Then I suppose we should let the evidence do the talking," she said. But as she spoke, she caught something in his expression. Not just arrogance, not just disdain, but something deeper. Like a man with a personal stake in the outcome. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just theater. Judge Gates wasn't being combative for show. He had something to hide. But what he didn't know was that she did too. Jasmine Crockett had been in plenty of tense hearings before, but this was different. Judge Gates wasn't just presiding. He was playing a game, deliberately trying to undermine her in front of the entire courtroom. But why? She could feel the weight of his stare as she laid out her arguments. Every word she spoke, he was waiting to pounce. She could see it. The slight curl of his lips, the slow tap of his fingers on the bench, as if daring her to keep going. She wasn't about to stop. "Your Honor," she said, keeping her tone measured, "these documents show a clear discrepancy in the funding allocations. The defendant's company received nearly triple the amount approved in the budget, and none of it is accounted for in state records." She turned slightly, gesturing to the projection screen displaying the financial data. "Now, if you look here." "Miss Crockett," Gates cut in, his voice dripping with smugness, "I hate to interrupt your presentation. Truly I do, but I think we've seen enough numbers for one day." Jasmine glanced at him, then back at the screen. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. "Your Honor," she replied, "with all due respect, these numbers are the foundation of the case." "Sure," he scoffed, "and yet I see nothing that justifies wasting this court's time on this." There was again wasting time. He was trying to bury the case before it could even start. She heard a rustle behind her, the prosecution team shifting, exchanging looks. They felt it too. Something was wrong. Jasmine gripped her pen tighter, flipping to the next page in her file. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit a motion." "Denied," he snapped. She looked up. "I haven't even stated the motion. And yet I can already tell it's going nowhere," Gates said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the bench. "Let's be honest, Miss Crockett. This whole case is built on speculation, a bit of creative accounting, and your screaming corruption." The defense attorney, a middle-aged man in a dark blue suit, smirked. He hadn't had to say a word. Gates was doing all the work for him. Jasmine exhaled slowly. "Your Honor, are you refusing to hear my motion before I've presented it?" A pause too long. "I'm refusing to indulge this circus any longer," he replied. The courtroom wasn't just tense now, it was alive. Eyes darted, heads turned, even the reporters in the back scribbled faster. Jasmine caught the glance of a juror, a woman in her 50s in a dark blazer. Her brows furrowed, lips pressed tight. She wasn't the only one noticing. The trouble with arrogance, it draws attention. Jasmine squared her shoulders. "Very well, Your Honor. Then let's move to the next piece of evidence." She turned back to the screen, clicking to the next slide. "This document, obtained via subpoena, shows that Miss Crockett," Gates interrupted, his tone different now. She stopped and looked at him. Judge Gates was no longer leaning back, no longer smirking. His hands were clasped, his mouth a thin, hard line. Something had shifted. "Approach the bench," he said. It wasn't a request. She hesitated, then set her papers down and walked toward him. The courtroom hushed. When she reached the bench, he lowered his voice, just enough for her alone to hear. "I'd strongly suggest you rethink the direction you're heading, Miss Crockett." She tilted her head slightly. "Excuse me. I'm saying," he murmured, "some fights aren't worth fighting." She let the words hang between them, then, slowly, deliberately, leaned in just an inch closer. "I don't scare easily, Judge Gates." A muscle in his jaw twitched. She turned and walked back to her table, but that moment told her everything. Jasmine Crockett sat down, her mind racing. That wasn't just a power play. It was a warning, a veiled threat cloaked as judicial authority. But why? She'd walked into this courtroom expecting resistance, maybe even hostility, but this was deeper. Judge Gates wasn't just biased. He was protecting something, or someone. She adjusted a stack of papers, keeping her expression neutral. The prosecution team beside her shifted, waiting for her to react. She didn't. Not yet. Instead, she lifted her chin and faced the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to continue presenting my evidence." Gates didn't respond right away. He let the silence stretch, as if deciding how far to push. Then, finally, proceed. But keep it brief. Jasmine didn't acknowledge the jab. She reached for the next file. This document is a contract between the defendant and the City Planning Board, outlining project expenses. You'll note the listed costs total just over $2 million. She paused, then, with precision, placed another sheet on the projector. However, this is an internal ledger from the defendant's company, showing the actual funds transferred were nearly double that. And here, she laid down a third document, is the approval signature signed by, she paused, letting the moment land, Judge Howard Gates. The courtroom didn't just tense, it cracked. A ripple of movement, eyes darting, pens scratching. The defense attorney stiffened, his smirk gone. Judge Gates didn't move. For the first time since she'd entered, his face was unreadable. Jasmine let the silence linger a moment longer, then continued. Your Honor, would you care to explain why your signature appears on an unauthorized financial transaction involving the defendant? It was a calculated risk. She didn't have the full picture yet, but what she had was enough to shake his foundation. Gates finally shifted, his fingers pressing together, knuckles whitening. That document, he said slowly, is inadmissible. Jasmine tilted her head. How so? It was obtained improperly, he replied. She let that sink in. Your Honor, this document was subpoenaed by my office. His nostrils flared. Then it was mishandled. I'm ruling it inadmissible. It won't be considered in this court. This time the shift wasn't just in the gallery. It was everywhere. The jury, the stenographer, even the bailiff. Everyone was watching. Jasmine crossed her arms, her tone calm. You realize this is a public hearing, correct? That the media is here? That everyone in this room just saw you declare key financial evidence inadmissible without reason. A muscle in his jaw jumped. That's enough, Miss Crockett, he snapped. She didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, she sat down. And that's when she changed everything. She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a small recorder, placed it on the table, and pressed play. A voice filled the courtroom. Low, gruff, unmistakable. Take care of it. I don't care how. The recording crackled, then continued. Make sure she doesn't get her hands on those ledgers. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Judge Gates didn't move, didn't breathe. Jasmine didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Now everyone in the room had heard him, and the real game was about to begin. The recording ended, leaving a thick, stifling silence in its wake. No murmurs, no speculation, just the stunned realization that Judge Howard Gates had been caught. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She kept her eyes on the recorder, as if daring him to challenge what it had played. But he didn't. He couldn't. Across the room, the defense attorney blinked, his composure slipping. The smirk was gone, replaced by something closer to dread. He glanced at his client, the developer whose empire rested on backroom deals and political ties. The man looked pale. Judge Gates cleared his throat. Miss Crockett, I don't know where you got that recording, but that's not the question you should be asking. Your Honor, she interrupted, her voice unwavering. The real question is, who were you talking to? His fingers clenched into fists. This is outrageous, he barked. This entire hearing is descending into chaos because of your stunts. Chaos, Jasmine echoed, her tone light, almost amused. I call this clarity. Finally, some transparency in this courtroom. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Jasmine let the moment breathe, let him sweat. Then she reached for another document and slid it across the table. Your Honor, this is a transcript of a wiretap legally obtained during our investigation. She tapped the page. It corroborates everything you just heard on that recording. Judge Gates stared at the paper, but didn't touch it. His chest rose and fell, his breathing louder now. Jasmine turned slightly, looking at the bailiff. Officer Reynolds, would you please read the highlighted section aloud? The bailiff hesitated, then picked up the transcript. His voice was steady, but the words weighed the room down. We'll take care of her. Crockett doesn't have anything solid yet, but if she does, I'll make sure it never sees a courtroom. A sharp inhale came from the gallery. Jasmine folded her hands. I'd like to submit this as evidence, Your Honor. Judge Gates's eyes flicked toward the exit. A tiny movement, but enough. Enough for the room to realize that, for the first time, he was thinking beyond his arrogance. He was thinking about escape, but it was far too late. Motion denied, he snapped. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? This hearing is over, Gates continued, his voice a fraction too loud. I won't allow. Judge Gates, Jasmine said smoothly. I wasn't asking for your permission. And then she made her move, the one she'd been waiting for. She turned to the back of the courtroom and gave the slightest, subtlest nod. A door opened. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Then a firm voice declared, "Judge Howard Gates, you are under arrest." Gasps erupted from every corner. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Cameras clicked. The jury stared in shock. Even the developer, who'd expected this trial to be a formality, looked stunned. Judge Gates didn't turn. He didn't speak. He just sat there, eyes fixed on a point on his bench, as if he could will it all away by not moving. But reality had caught up. Jasmine Crockett remained seated as two uniformed officers flanked the judge. One pulled out handcuffs. "This is absurd," Gates muttered, though the fight had drained from his voice. The officer didn't flinch. "You have the right to remain silent." For the first time in his career, Judge Howard Gates actually was. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut was deafening. They locked around Gates's wrists, sealing his fate before the very people he'd ruled over for years. The once commanding figure behind the bench sat frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The courtroom buzzed with stunned murmurs, disbelief crackling like electricity. Reporters rushed to capture the moment, their pens flying across notepads. Even the jury, bound to impartiality, couldn't hide their shock. Jasmine Crockett stayed seated, her expression unreadable. This wasn't about triumph or revenge. This was about justice. Judge Gates finally found his voice. "You can't do this," he said, low, almost a whisper, as if he didn't believe it himself. The officer holding his arm didn't waver. "Sir, you're being taken into custody for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of judicial power. You'll have a chance to speak with an attorney." Gates yanked against the cuffs, his face flushing. "This is a disgrace. I'm the law in this courtroom." Jasmine stood at last, straightening her blazer. "Not anymore." His head snapped toward her. For the first time, the arrogance gave way to something else, something closer to fear. The officers pulled him to his feet, but he resisted. "This is political. This is—" Jasmine shook her head. "This is accountability." The room fell silent again. A lifetime of unchecked power, gone in an instant. Gates's face twisted, his jaw clenched as he turned to the gallery. His eyes darted from face to face, searching for an ally, someone to call this a mistake. But no one moved because it wasn't. A few feet away, the defense attorney had gone pale. The developer, who'd thought his influence would shield him, wasn't faring better. His fingers gripped the table's edge, his breathing shallow. Jasmine let her gaze linger on him for a moment before turning back to the judge. "Your Honor," she said, calm and measured, "if you have anything to say, I'd suggest saving it for your arraignment." Gates's mouth opened, then closed. There was nothing left to say. The officers began escorting him to the side exit, but before they reached the door, the developer finally spoke. "Wait, wait." His chair scraped the floor as he shot up, eyes darting between Gates and Crockett. "This is getting out of hand. We can work something out." Jasmine turned, raising an eyebrow. "Work something out?" The man swallowed, visibly unraveling. "I mean, there's no need for this public spectacle. Let's be reasonable." Jasmine studied him, then stepped closer. "You seem nervous, Mr. Lawson." His mouth opened, but no words came. She tilted her head. "Why might that be?" He shook his head, forcing a laugh. "Nervous? No, this is insane. You don't seriously think Gates is guilty, do you?" Jasmine let the question hang before answering. "Do you?" Silence. The officers moved again, leading Gates through the door. When it shut behind him, the weight of the moment settled over the courtroom like a thick fog. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was the unraveling of a system protected for too long. And Jasmine wasn't done. She glanced at the jury, the empty judge's seat, then the defense table. "I believe we still have a trial to finish." But after what had just happened, everyone knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom felt different now, lighter, as if years of corruption had lifted in an instant. Judge Gates was gone, hauled off in cuffs, and the shock lingered like a symphony's final note. Jasmine Crockett took her seat again, adjusting the papers before her. The trial wasn't over. Not yet, but the biggest obstacle had been removed. She turned her attention to the defense table. The developer, Charles Lawson, had gone eerily quiet. His usual smugness was replaced by something colder, more calculated. He was still assessing the damage. How much of his safety net had just been torn away? Jasmine could see the gears turning in his head. Without Gates on the bench, his team would have to argue the case on its merits, and they had none. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Lawson, would you like to proceed with today's hearing, or would you rather discuss a deal? His jaw clenched. This is a witch hunt. Jasmine gave a small smile. No, Mr. Lawson. This is justice. He scoffed, shaking his head. You think one corrupt judge changes anything? You think this means you've won? Jasmine didn't reply right away. She let the silence stretch, let the moment sink in. I think it means the system still works, she said finally. That no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, the truth will always catch up. Lawson exhaled sharply, but he had nothing left to say. The judge's seat remained empty, but it didn't matter. The case was no longer in his hands. The prosecution team exchanged glances, and one of Jasmine's colleagues leaned in. Now might be a good time to push for a deal. She considered it. She could feel the shift in the room, the way the jury watched, waited. They'd just witnessed something unforgettable, but she wasn't about to let this end quietly. She stood. Your Honor. She paused, then corrected herself. To the presiding judge who will take over this case, I'd like to formally request to proceed with additional evidence. Given today's events, it's clear we need a full investigation into how far this corruption reaches. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Jasmine continued. Judge Gates was just part of the problem. If my team could uncover this, there's more names, more people who thought they were untouchable. She turned to Lawson. So, I'll ask again. Do you want to talk? Lawson sat rigid, his fingers tapping the table. He was weighing his options. Then, finally, he exhaled. If I do, I want protection. Jasmine nodded slowly. Then you'd better start talking. The courtroom wasn't the same place it had been an hour ago. The balance of power had shifted. The walls shielding the powerful had begun to crack. And Jasmine Crockett had just sent a message to everyone watching. No one is above the law. As the bailiff called for order and the trial prepared to move forward, reporters in the back rushed to file their stories. This wasn't just a case, it was history. And it was only the beginning.